Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. We have Kate Merton. We're talking about some really exciting things. We've hopefully you've heard a bunch of different podcasts relating to some of the questions around pharmacogenomics. This podcast, we're going to do something different. We're going to talk about pharmacogenomics and what the future looks like.
This is the DarshanTalks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.
Pharmacogenomics, people seem to think about it as a field all by itself, and they talk about how pharmacogenomics is great. What really seems to empower pharmacogenomics, in my opinion, is the other fields that are developing around it. Things like data science, things like precision medicine, things like artificial intelligence. And to do that, we have Kate Merton, and Kate has tremendous amounts of expertise in surprisingly a lot of these fields. And Kate, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us what makes your experience relevant, and then we'll let you launch into it.
Okay, not sure if it's all totally relevant. Okay, but by background, my PhD is in pharmacology. I studied the mathematics of how drugs work in the body. So that set me up to work in a drug discovery team. We discovered a drug. I went on to clinical trials, worked with a team that got one approved. And then I went to the business side of things and worked out how to actually get that patient into the hands, product into the hands of a patient. Then I went on and did other things in the realms of thinking about AI strategy and how it can be implemented in the drug discovery and development process, and the use of blockchain. And then most recently I worked with innovation groups, some of which were in the data science area, the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And right now I am lucky enough to head up the commercial group for a clinical diagnostics subsidiary of Novartis.
Welcome, as always, Kate. Here's a really basic question. Is pharmacogenomics by itself as powerful as some of the other data fields that are coming in, like artificial intelligence and blockchain? Are these going to enhance it? And if so, in what ways?
So by definition, pharmacogenomics is looking at certain sequences which would suggest that you are going to have an altered response to a drug, a chemical entity. So that is looking at certain sequences related to certain drugs. Now, if you look at the whole genome of an individual and you look at all of the data that is available out there in research and use artificial intelligence to match up, okay, a patient's got this genetic background, there's all this information, I can connect all of the dots, that is going to have an amazing impact. It's going to be, I would say globally, it's going to be far greater than what pharmacogenomics does right now. Pharmacogenomics answers a very specific question. The use of artificial intelligence and data science can answer so many more other things that we haven't even thought of yet. And blockchain obviously is going to enable the more efficient and transmission of that data and enable patients to own it and make more decisions about it. So it's not that it's any better, it's just got a different scope.
So before we sort of launch into this topic a little bit further, could you talk to us about what artificial intelligence actually is? Because I've heard everything from this is how to it is literally just a system that is effectively a chatbot. And you can pass the Turing test, and you can look up what the Turing test is, but you can pass the Turing test with effectively a chatbot. What do you mean by the word artificial intelligence, first of all?
So by what I mean from artificial intelligence is sort of a machine learning where you can take an algorithm, which seems to be the word that everybody wants to use at the moment, which is like a defined equational process, which will compute something for you. But based upon what it computes out, it will kind of learn and iterate and augment that answer. So it will get more and more refined. So you'll give it a bunch of data, you'll ask it a question, and it will just get better and better and better at answering the question for you without needing human input. Now, in order to do that, it needs a very large data set to learn from what the truth is. But massive flag is that artificial intelligence is only as good as the learning data set that you give it and the data that you test on it. So it does not substitute human reasoning at this point.
So that really raises two questions for me. The first question, we've had several podcasts so far, Kate, where you've talked about how HCPs should make their decisions based on pharmacogenomics. If we start heading towards a world where AI is becoming more and more powerful, and there are conversations, as you know, about AI taking over the role of a physician or at least augmenting that, do you see the AI almost prescribing pharmacogenomics because it's a requirement for it to make qualified decisions in the future?
I think that AI can be used as a decision augmentation tool. I don't think it's going to replace a physician in any way. It might help with sort of diagnostics. We know that some sort of things that pathologists do right now with regards to looking at slides, etc., that can be substituted by artificial intelligence. Doesn't mean that you don't need the pathologist at the end to make the final decision. And it may be that AI will say, hey, in order to, speaking to that kind of like really good data set that it needs to make a good decision, it may be that you need genetic information, not just pharmacogenomic, genetic information to build up the data set to make a better decision.
So that really takes the question of what's been in the news, which is a lot of pharmacogenomics companies and genetic companies in general are looking for data sets. And what they've been doing is reaching out to some of these companies where you reach out to find out who your ancestors were. What is your opinion on use of that type of data to evaluate, to make better decisions for patients, if you will?
So just to make sure that we level set, there is that saying that data is the new currency. I absolutely believe that to be true, because if the group that has got the most complete and the best data set is obviously going to come out with the most appropriate conclusion from which they can make the most efficient decisions moving forward, strategic decisions moving forward. Now, it may be that those data sets that are currently being generated by 23andMe, Ancestry.com, and a variety of other groups I won't mention right now, that is a whole bunch of data from which to make assessments. Do I think it's appropriate that population-based conclusions is made from that? Well, yes, but you also have to remember that someone has actually paid to generate that data based upon their own personal genomics. So then the question of, are you allowed to do it? Because then you've got to ask each and every person if they allow that to happen. So I think the use of the data sets makes perfect sense, but then you have to think about where the information actually comes from.
Just to be clear, this is Kate's personal opinion and does not reflect the opinions of her employer or anyone else like that. So as a lawyer, I feel like I had to put that disclaimer in there just in case someone else comes back out. But you kind of raised the idea of patient-owned data, or at least patient-informed data. It's funny you say this because I had a conversation with my dad just yesterday, and he was talking about how he, as a 70-something-year-old, he goes, if my data can be used to help people, I'm all about that. Is that a generational thing? Because I've spoken to patient advocates who have your opinion, where they say, the data belongs to me. If someone's going to profit from it, I should be part of that profit. So do you think, so that distinction, if you will? So
it's not that I believe that individuals will want to profit from their data. Individuals should be given the choice on what purpose their data is put towards. So if you ask me, if I had the choice to donate my data through some sort of blockchain app that enabled me to provide it to a clinical trial, real world evidence clinical trial that I knew was going to benefit a bunch of people that I was never going to meet, I absolutely would do it, and I wouldn't want any compensation for it. I think that more people are like your dad than probably people anticipate, and it's because it's going to benefit everyone. Like, I might donate my information and it benefits Joe Bloggs down the street. But what if Joe Bloggs donates his information? It actually benefits one of my children, and it saves them, from something bad happening from a medical perspective. I think a lot of people are going to want to do it. They just want to have the decision, they don't want some other person making that decision for them.
So you think it's a question of just knowledge and not a question of money, and you think we've just reached a point where we've treated this as a consumer good and patients are not being as involved as they probably should be? Is that a fair description of what you just said?
I don't think anyone would be surprised to know that certain companies that have previously had access to a lot of personal data, genomic or otherwise, have then sold de-identified sets of that data and generated really great revenues from it. That was, a really good business model. And I think now there's an increased education from the patient perspective where they're like, is that those numbers mine? Is that information mine? And then the question is, who should be generating? Should anyone be generating the profit from it? Should we just be donating it because, we're humanitarians and we want the best for everybody? Or are we okay with a more capitalistic look at it? I think as patients get to make their own decisions, and obviously that's going to involve a lot of education, I think that you're going to see a lot of business models change. And if someone is going to get paid for the use of that data, maybe it should be the person that originally generated the genes or the tissue samples to make it actually even exist.
So if that's true, then what does that future look like? You refer to precision medicine. What do you mean by that word? And how will pharmacogenomics with AI help us get there?
So when I say precision medicine, I mean going back to the theme of right treatment, right intervention at the right time. So pharmacogenomics, by definition, is looking at a very specific subset of information about one particular gene, one SNP, which talks about one particular drug. If you do a whole genome sequence, that provides out more information. And if you incorporate other sort of personalized information as well, about people's lifestyle preferences and that kind of stuff, that then opens up like a plethora of other treatments and interventions for someone. So precision medicine is way beyond pharmacogenomics. I would say pharmacogenomics is part of it.
So what I hear you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the future is, as you put it, the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. Who helps make that decision and who should be informing that process?
So I think personalized medicine is already here and it's just going to expand. By definition, personalized means the person actually gets to make more of their healthcare decisions. And I would say it's going to be in partnership with healthcare providers. Previously we were in a world where, in some countries, you didn't even have access to your own records and the doctor made every single decision. Now that's going to be reversed where the person has a bunch of information available to them and they get to work with their physician to make decisions for them. And it's not just going to be about healthcare related information. We now know that sort of preventative medicine is incredibly effective. And if we can look at someone's habits and intervene in sort of small things now, you might prevent them getting, chronic diseases such as diabetes in the future. So it really is going to become sort of personalized medicine by definition. It's going to be the person, and the onus is going to be on the person to manage that too.
So that really brings a question of the onus is on the person, but you're using the physician, pharmacist, nurses, genetic counselors to help that patient make the right decision. So if that's true, which profession do you see having the most impact, at least from the viewpoint we have right now? Obviously the future is hazy right now, but that's exactly why I'm asking you the question, because you're smart enough to make it at least a prediction. If you're
okay. So if I'm looking at my hazy crystal ball, I think currently if you look at the world of pharmacogenomics, who are the people most appropriately positioned to sort of intervene and inform, that's probably going to be people such as yourself who are pharmacists, who are trained in the knowledge of what drugs will do what to what people and what are the side effects. They're even more highly trained than a physician. So I think from pharmacogenomics, you look to the pharmacist in partnership with the physician to make those decisions. If you look into the future, and you might have a person who's going to be enabled through artificial intelligence to make more informed decisions, then I think it's going to earn more on the side of the person. But that's not going to happen overnight, and I think it's going to be a big cultural shift, and it will also depend geographically on where you live.
Which is really interesting to me, because as a pharmacist, I've never had a course on genetics, but I think that's going to have to become included in the pharmacy syllabus as people start developing those courses, because it sounds like it's almost inevitable, and not preparing pharmacists for this is practically malpractice on behalf of pharmacy schools. Is that am I being too is that hyperbole?
No, I don't think so at all. Actually, I was approached by a medical school recently when I was in my more innovation role to kind of get my perspective on what was coming down the pike, because they are trying to prepare the physicians of the future, and things are changing so rapidly. It's almost like, what do we teach them for like in 5 years? Because everything's going to be different. So they even called up someone like me to say, hey, what do you think is going to happen in 5 years? So I think arming pharmacists right now with training in genetics is, I think is kind of like a bare minimum.
So then who bears the responsibility to arm the pharmacist appropriately? Is it the equivalent of what would be considered APHA, or the American Pharmacists Association? Is it the lab company that's doing this type of genetic testing? Is it pharmacy schools? Is it all of the above? And if so, in what sort of roles, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above in partnership, because, and you've got to think what everyone's getting out of it. Like the diagnostics companies, they're not going to be able, there's no point in them providing the information if no one's going to use it. So they need to make sure that pharmacists are appropriately educated in order to use it. And pharmacists, once they become educated, become approved to practice by a certain board. So it's going to take collaboration between all of the people who function as the pharmacists, the people who approve them, and the people who provide them the information.
This is awesome. This was a great conversation. Thank you again, Kate. Any last words?
No, just thank you as always.
Thank you so much.
This is the DarshanTalks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.